everyone's attention to the following. This hearing will be filmed and streamed live. The recording and transcript will be published afterwards on the States Assembly website. Please ensure that all electronic devices, including mobile phones, are switched to silent. So I suggest that we do a round of introductions. My name is Deputy Hilary Jeanne and I'm the Chair of the Environment, Housing Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel.
Deputy Coles, Vice Chair and Member of the Planning Committee.
Deputy Alex Curtis, Panel Member and Vice Chair of the Planning Committee.
Constable David Johnson, Panel Member.
Deputy Steve Luce, I'm Minister for the Environment.
Louise Magris, I'm Director of Housing, Environment and Placemaking.
Kevin Pilley, Head of Place and Spatial Planning.
Thank you. We have 2 hours for this hearing and a lot of questions for you, Minister and officers. So the Bridging Island Plan is the island's main planning framework or rulebook. It sets the rules to help protect and improve our environment while also meeting Jersey's development needs up to 2025. Usually an island plan runs for 10 years, but the Bridging Island Plan was created as a shorter 3-year plan due to the uncertainty caused by major events like COVID and Brexit. The BIP, as we call it, was designed to focus on 5 areas: making homes more affordable, improving life for town residents and enhancing placemaking, tackling the climate emergency and transport challenges, protecting the island from poor quality and inappropriate development, and providing an initial response to the impacts of the pandemic and Brexit. As we now approach the end of 2025, the point when the Bridging Island Plan was expected to transition to a longer-term island plan, the panel's intention is for this public hearing to focus on whether you believe, Minister, that the Bridging Island Plan as a rulebook remains the right tool for government to effect changes that the island requires now and into the future. So on that note, my first question is, please could you describe how you feel the Bridging Island Plan is operating in practice?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's doing okay, and I think we have benefited from island plans over a number of years, decades now. We adopted a planning system many decades ago, which was a plan-led system, and we have developed various island plans during that time. You're right, absolutely, that the Bridging Island Plan was a response to mainly the COVID pandemic and Brexit. And for a number of reasons, we decided to do a short plan. And as we know, we did that. It was a slightly shortened process, slightly different process. And we came out with a plan which we've been using now for the last 3.5, 4 years. I think it's worked relatively well. And I'd say right at the outset that if the housing requirement and population numbers had done what we thought they were going to do at the time of coming up with that plan, I am sure that the department and the Minister of the day would have come forward with some proposals to find the money to do what we thought we were going to have to do during this year, last year and next year, which was to come up with another 10-year plan. I don't think we must underestimate the cost of a major 10-year island plan review, the implications on staff resource and time. It's not an inconsiderable piece of work, and Kevin is here to vouch for that. He and one other officer were very instrumental in the Bridging Island Plan. It's a huge piece of work, and we undertake it. If we undertake it, we must make sure that we have all the various resources necessary.
Well, we will explore a bit the assumptions that you've just touched on a little bit there, and some of the Bridging Island Plan context in more detail during the hearing. But have any key challenges arisen specifically from the operation of the Bridging Island Plan, given the current context, both locally and internationally, do you see?
I take a view that, generally speaking, island plan reviews are driven by housing demand, the need to rezone more fields or sites for housing, whether that's affordable, over 65, whatever. Housing usually drives an island plan. And as I said at the outset, had the housing numbers and population numbers gone through 22, 3, 4, 5 in the way we expected when we developed the Bridging Island Plan, I'm sure we would have come back sooner. But this plan, I think, is still delivering. There are some areas, and I mean, I've discussed with all of you, Alex in particular, various sections where we will be needing to develop some more space for various industries, for various things, infrastructure things and all sorts. At the moment, that's not really pressing. And we have a number of sites, housing sites in development, some have been completed, some yet to start from that Bridging Island plan. So we know we've still got some to deliver, and the population numbers indicate that we're okay in as well to how it was supply and demand at the moment. So there's nothing pressing. Having said that, there's no doubt in my mind that the moment a new government comes into office next summer, in a year's time, one of their first big decisions will be, are we finding the resources to do another island plan review? And if so, let's hook those in. Let's get officers. I know before we get to the next, Kevin may say more, but certainly before we get to the next election, the team are certainly going to be doing some preparation work for what we will need to do.
Yeah, and we will definitely
after the
touch
next
on that.
government, there will have to be a key decision. It's probably a seven-figure number when it comes to money. It's over £1 million.
But do you see any challenges that have risen? And you've mentioned that that we've still got this space for the development of the housing that have already been rezoned.
I've
but
said,
has there been any other challenges around delivering?
I wouldn't. I suppose depends how serious the challenge is. But I've always said I think light industry is badly represented, and I think that's certainly an area that we're going to need to look at seriously at the next island plan. We know mineral resources are something else we're going to have to address. At the previous island plan, it was pretty much said that we were looking towards the end of our own on Jersey mineral resources. That's going to have to be reviewed again. We've got 2 quarries. Do we change tack there? Water is a very important issue. I'm working hard to make sure that we're going to review the 5-year strategy that Jersey Water are about to launch in the very near future to see that whether we agree with them as to how we secure enough water for the future. And that may involve some big chunks of land. We don't know yet, depending on what they go. There's various ways of providing that water. So some of those big issues will be dealt with. We know we're starting to address rising sea levels. That's another one. And sort of the in-ground infrastructure may be something we'll need to look at as well. But I think at the moment we're under control, but we know that we do need to start work soon. An island plan review is going to be probably a 2-year process from start to complete finish. And we need to make sure we've got that 2 years up our sleeve so that we don't find ourselves desperately needing a plan 9 months before it arrives.
Yeah, and I think some of those elements and challenges you've touched on we'll definitely drill into a little bit later. But I also expect you'll touch on more the operational structure of planning between policy development and regulation, potentially in some of the questions that we have coming. And so maybe it'd be helpful to briefly get an explanation about the difference. So how is the planning department in regulation managing the changes brought about over the life of the Bridging Island plan, such as changes to key policy areas from the 2011 Island plan?
Well, the regulation department have a number of various things that come out of an island plan that they have to look at. We are, and I think it's quite common knowledge, under-resourced in regulation. We have some vacancies which we are trying to fill. It's a very demanding department. Most complaints to politicians come with something to do with regulation. Either people are being regulated or they're not being regulated. Certainly the planning department, I think, I know have responded fantastically well in the last 18 months and have really knuckled down, put in some serious work to get our planning department into a position now where applications are dealt with in a very timely manner. Certainly the professional industry out there are very much happier with the way they are working with, and I stress working with the department. There's a lot more discussion goes on. Pre-application advice is actually meaning something now. We have an industry partnership board which has come out of the reform of the planning department, which I've been so keen on. That seems to be working really well. Lots of people on that board very happy with the way it's operating. But I think the resources are what they are. We're all pushed for resources, whether that's financial or numbers, and certainly in regulation. While I believe the development control, but I think both development and building control are both up to speed on numbers. There are other parts of regulation where we're short of staff and we're trying to fill those vacancies.
I think the other side of the question that we would also be interested in is, in essence, when a new island plan comes into to force, the applicants and then the regulation department have to, in essence, learn how to apply that new plan.
Yep.
And of course, that's pretty much a approval in the Assembly changes the rule book, changes the policy regime under which applicants have to apply, and also how regulation have to interpret the nuanced language of what is a very big document. So it's whether now, 3 years in, compared to, for example, the day of implementation, whether in changing from applying the rules of the 2011 plan to interpreting the landscape under the Bridging Island plan, whether anything's arisen from the department having to learn, as it always will have to, learn that new muscle of applying a new set of
Yeah, absolutely. And I suspect, and Kevin may answer this, but I imagine that in the days after a final approval of the new island plan, policy officers go in, I imagine, to development control and have a sit down with the planning officers and talk through all the changes that have happened, because it does mean literally from one day to the next, officers are having to take a different interpretation. But one thing I would say, more than 10 years ago now, when I was previously minister, a bit before that maybe, you went into planning department at South Hill with your application and your plans and all your reviews, and I think the checklist of things you needed to do probably stretched to one side of A4, but no more. And now the various things that we've added to the requirements for an applicant is quite a document now, various reports and investigations and reviews that need to be done and to be submitted with any application. And that is certainly not only an onus on the applicant with cost involved, it's also now considerably, and I think I get where you're going to now. There's a lot more policies for planning officers to consider, and making decisions on applications is not getting easier from that perspective, because there's such a wide variety of considerations to be taken into. They're all material considerations now, and I would say inventing is probably the wrong word. We keep bringing more and more into account. So are we considering this? Are we considering that? In the old days, it was quite straightforward. Does the design fit? Is it too big? Is it overbearing? Fine, that's okay. Now there's an awful lot more work that needs to be done before an application is put in. And consequently, officers have to consider all that, and a lot more consultees. It's not as straightforward as it used to be. Is that good or bad? Well, it's good that we're taking a much broader approach to consideration, but it doesn't make the job easier either for the applicant or for officers, because there's just so much more to consider. I don't know if you want anything, Kevin, about how officers, 2 days after an island plan debate finally put to bed, how we work with development control.
Yeah, so I think there's a number of things to bear in mind. So whilst we do have that challenge in Jersey, the way the law is written at the moment, as soon as one island plan is approved, the other one falls away. So immediately, literally, as states members approve it, the new plan becomes the basis for new decisions, and clearly colleagues in regulation need to respond to that. What I would say, however, is it's not entirely a surprise. Clearly, the draft plan has been published for some considerable time, and we engage with our colleagues in regulation in terms of both the development of the policy itself and also in terms of the evolution of policy as it goes through the plan making process. And what I would say is what we've seen in Jersey, looking at our successive plans, and we are quite fortunate in Jersey, we've had full plan coverage of the island since 1987. You go to some parts of the UK and they don't have up-to-date plan coverage. So we've been fortunate in that we've maintained that plan coverage for the island. And we've seen, I'd suggest that it's an evolution of policy, not a revolution of policy. So even though the policy numbers and some of the detail of the wording of some of the policies may change, some of the principles that sit behind those policies are very familiar to planning officers. So if you think about protection of the countryside, for example, we've had various types of policy that have protected the countryside, and new officers just need to get used to the new wording of policy. It's not a revolutionary change in terms of policy direction. What I would say, however, is when we do review a plan, we clearly review it and we look at the performance of policies and look at how they've worked, and we look to adjust those policies to see if they can work better or more efficiently. But we're also mindful, in terms of reviewing the plan, one of the purposes in doing that is to look at other decisions that the states have made and look at other states' policy objectives and look at how the planning system can help deliver those. So one of the things we saw between the revised 2011 Island Plan and the Bridging Island Plan was the reflection of some of the sustainability considerations. So we had the sustainable transport policy, we had the shoreline management plan, we had the carbon neutral roadmap. So the new plan is much more considerate, if you like, of sustainability issues, and there have been some new policy areas that colleagues in I&E and applicants have had to deal with. So the Minister referenced the flood risk, so work on shoreline management plan. That was supported by an additional piece of work we did for the evidence base for the Bridging Island Plan that looked at not only shoreline management but also inland flooding. So now flood risk is a material planning consideration. It wasn't in the 2011 Island Plan. So planners now need to deal with that. We've got flood risk maps that are now part of the plan. Applicants need to submit flood risk assessments where their planning applications are in flood risk areas. So that's a new area. And what we will do over the period of the plan is work with colleagues. Ministers referenced the Industry Partnership Board, work with industry to see what people are making of this policy, how easy is it for them to use, what sort of issues are they having. So that's one example. Another example is GD5, which is the demolition policy. It's quite a hard thing to measure the performance of an existing building relative to a development proposal. And so we've worked to try and look at a methodology that colleagues can use to assess planning applications to demolish a building relative to the performance of new buildings. How do you measure those? That's an evolving field of inquiry everywhere. There's no established methodology to do that. So we have to find a best fit that works for Jersey, and that will always be a bit of iteration. So, over time, we will look at how those policies are landing. Clearly, the Minister's got an option to produce guidance. If there's particular difficulties with a policy, then the Minister can prepare some guidance that sets out what the expectation is in terms of what people will provide to support a planning application, and also how that policy might be interpreted and applied. So, there are tools available during the plan period where the Minister can, complement the existing policy regime in the plan with
So
more tools.
we've got some questions focused on specifically on those, and you've touched on stakeholder kind of feedback and the fact that you've built this kind of this partnership board to help kind of bring the industry along on this Bridging Island Plan kind of journey. Is there, you've talked a bit about that feedback, but is there any further feedback about the plan itself or about its impact that it's had that would be useful to note? Noting that we've also gone out to some stakeholders to ask them for their feedback as well as part of this evidence gathering in this.
I think most professionals in the industry, construction industry, architects, engineers, major applicants, all understand the principle of an island plan, which is there are policies which cannot be changed between island plans, and supplementary guidance can help to clarify, but it can't change policy. So while they might not be happy about a policy, I think they understand that no amount of pressure on the Minister or officers or people in development control is going to make any difference, because the policy cannot be changed. All we can do is to give more guidance. I'm trying to think. The partnership board, certainly, I think one of the pieces of work they're about to start on is actually how they feel about policy. Strangely enough, we're talking about it. I think that's one of their subjects to cover. I don't go to every meeting, but I have made it clear that I want to go to meetings on a regular basis so that I can hear from them directly what they want to say. But certainly The first bits have focused on the planning reform inside the department and performance and how we can improve the performance. And certainly the partnership board have helped us to work on the pre-app and the discussion, the working together ethos, and that's all been good. But I am conscious that they're going to look at policy and come up with some ideas themselves as to how. So maybe while I don't have an answer specifically to your question, Chair, I think the Industry Partnership Board are going to come up with some challenges to some of those policies. And I mean, Kevin mentioned just now the new policy about do we knock this home down or do we actually refurbish what we've got? And that's where a major application, I think in the next island plan, we're going to have to look at the policy where the historic building versus trying to heat historic building versus the historics, the listed buildings. How do we balance this? Because we know carbon neutral roadmap, we know it's going to become increasingly difficult to burn. Well, we are going to make it increasingly more challenging to burn carbon to heat homes. There will be a challenge there. People are going to say I know they're going to say to me, how do you expect me to meet my 300-year-old home? I can't do this, this and this. You won't let me burn carbon. I've got single glazed windows. I've got X, Y, Z. We're going to have to face some really difficult challenges to how we get those two sides of the argument to balance. The historic homes where we burn a lot of carbon, we know that. New builds, very, very little carbon because of the way we have come up with the building control rules. But that's a particular policy which I
think that's kind of just finalising in this section is that, you've touched on a little bit there because that's obviously links into kind of more of a global context that we're feeding as part of our on the climate, the carbon neutral roadmap, for example. But the global context has changed since the Bridging Island Plan was introduced. And so has there been an impact to the implementation, the success of the implementation because of the changing global context? Or has that been, has it been able to kind of ride the wave, I guess, of changing global situation?
I think if you're going to start talking global context, certainly national and then international, it's clear that some of the housing sites that we've approved in planning in recent years have been demolished and they're not being built. They're not being built out, I think, not necessarily because of an issue in planning department. I think we've made quite a few approvals and, it's easy to point the finger at planning and saying there's a whole load of stuff that's not getting done and let's blame planning. Well, that's fine. We're used to that. But actually, when you look at sites like Les Sablons, the Apollo Hotel and others, I am no expert, but I would say that the reason they're not being built out is because of global concerns. The price of money, the price of raw materials, that's basically it, I think, really. Any large development is only taken forward if it's a going concern. And when numbers and money is tight, the small change in interest rates for borrowing or a major change in the cost of raw materials to either wood, steel, concrete, you name it, those can add up to the difference or to pushing a button to say, yes, we'll go ahead with that large scheme or not. So I think from that perspective, I don't know if that's quite where you're going. But unless other people can think of a great, that for me would be, if there's an effect of, Ukraine and Middle East and this sort of thing and American presidential elections, certainly the price of materials is gone up astronomically since this plan came into effect, and the price of money is not as cheap as it was.
Could I just expand on that slightly? Because regardless of where it comes from, it means that certain sites aren't being developed under the plans that are approved. Mm-hmm. Is it your feeling then that the plan is still a route to sustainable development and it shouldn't be the job of the plan, in essence, to bridge the gap to make developments, in changing contexts viable? So if we say a developer feels that, money is too expensive, demand is uncertain, it's not for the plan to kind of compromise too much there. It's because a plan has to balance so much. And actually that sometimes that's just the competing interests of kind of different stakeholders.
Well, yes, there are sites being developed, and mainly they're being developed for affordable homes. We know that Andium are obviously responsible for quite a number of this, not all, but quite a number of those sites. There's schemes in place to help people with, shared equity. That is a way of helping people into it, and some of the development will be aimed at shared equity, some is affordable. Andium obviously have a business model which they can follow. Other developers may feel they want to do things like, I don't know how, but they will want their percentage on top. It seems clear to me that moving forward, if we're going to continue to build affordable homes, the government's going to have to continue to help with shared equity. And I think we need to be prepared for that equity figure to be quite high. I don't know what the percentages are at the moment, but, it could be 40% government, 60% bio, it could be 50, but I don't think we should be surprised if we find ourselves in a 50-50 situation soon. In some ways, that's good for government in as much as they will invest in a home and they've still got that asset, if you like, on the books. But it does mean that government will have to come up with a considerable amount of cash in order to fund that 50%, because any developer is going to need to be paid for the very bare minimum, the building costs, the cost of acquiring the site. I have a small amount of experience of this in St Martin's, where we did our own scheme. But you've got to pay for the site, you've got to pay for the building, and no matter how hard you try to push down costs with economies of scale, the absolute cost of the net cost of building a home is not inconsiderable. It's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds, no matter how cheap you try to do it. We don't have that many state-owned sites. I know previous planning ministers some time ago were saying, very forward people were saying state-owned sites should be put forward with no cost to the plot.
No, and I think, Minister, where the question is, but I think that be teased out maybe in other questions, it's kind of the before, where it's that compromise to try to encourage the as you've said at the beginning.
Oh well, if we're going back to encouraging,
and whether there's a compromise that has to happen with the Bridging Island Plan.
I'm not a great fan of government getting involved in making, forcing business. I'm free market economy, but I appreciate fully that, every government has to have a social housing policy, and we need to put a lot of money into it to help people who can't afford. And the can't afford bit is increasing as the cost of these homes is getting to the point where, your average man on the street just can't afford to buy a home, and we need to help them to achieve their aspirations in that regard. But as regards, I don't know quite where you're going. We do have, I don't want to mention it, but I'm going to have to. There is a part of the H5 compulsory purchase that says that within 3 years of the plan, if it hasn't happened, that's an option. I'm not sure that we want to go there yet.
Let's talk about that in a bit, because I think we first head down the.
Sorry, Chair. Can I just raise the issue? In terms of responding to global challenges, we've talked a little bit about some of the climate change challenges. You're talking about economic uncertainty, and I think we have to be conscious of the vires of the plan. The plan is a development and land use plan, and the plan can encourage development activity by setting a positive framework that enables development proposals to come forward. Now, clearly, economic circumstances may change over time, and clearly, decision makers will decide what weight they give to various parts of the plan in terms of making decisions on planning applications, having regard to the context within which they're sitting. So I think we need to be conscious of the sort of the legal framework within which the plan is prepared. And the minister's talked about a number of mechanisms which go beyond what the plan can do. So exactly. Compulsory purchase is something. It's a power that sits under the planning and building law. There's a separate bit of legislation that enables the states to take that forward, but that's a mechanism that sits outside of the planning system. Likewise, the issue about how you procure homes, how you deliver homes. The funding mechanisms associated with that are essentially outside of the planning system. The planning system can provide the land, the development opportunities, the policy framework that will encourage development activity, but it can't deal with all of the ingredients that might lead to.
And understand
And
that.
something that
yeah.
has been talked about previously, and just a minute ago mentioned the cost, the cost of the plot that you put
And I
the
think
house
we're
on.
gonna talk about rezoned housing in a minute, but I think we need to step back a bit and just go back to the underlying assumptions, because I think I know we're clear that yes, there is, the plan is a certain plan, and then there are obviously mechanisms outside of that help to move the plan along, but that is a specific rule book, and I think there is some questions and assumptions.
I'm thinking about other things and just stepping back from housing and thinking about other parts of the island that we want to encourage. I mean, your panel will know that I, at Chamber of Commerce some time ago, said that indicated that I want more economic value to be.
So we're definitely going to be touching on those questions. So we're heading there. We're heading there, but I think we're first turn to Deputy Curtis to talk about those assumptions that are underlying the Bridging Island Plan, because I think that helps set the context that we're going into some of the details.
And I think some of the kind of the question as to what the plan can do is, to what extent does a plan do you change what the plan allows? So if in the case of development, it might be we say actually you can demolish what you like, because we want to see construction at any cost. Now the plan aims for sustainable development. It's that kind of balance I think we'll explore in certain areas in more detail. But on underlying assumptions. A little preamble just for those listening. The Bridging Island Plan was developed around a set of key underlying assumptions that formed a core evidence base. And the panel would like to explore some of these and take each of these in turn to discuss whether these assumptions still have materialised as perhaps were predicted, and what's changed and whether any gaps have arisen from that. So starting on population and housing. So I think that was a big area that you mentioned. The Bridging Island Plan was prepared and approved prior to the 2021 census being published. It included various assumptions on population, but a key one was that in 2019, the population was estimated to be 107,800, and the plan forecast a housing demand based on net migration averaging about plus 700 a year since during the plan period. So to what extent have those assumptions on what population was and what housing demand was actually reflected the reality during the plan period?
Well, I mean, I think it's fairly clear any assumptions we made on population before the Bridging Island Plan were wrong. And what has happened is that the population is basically flatlined during the time that we thought it might have increased. You mentioned 700, it might have been that it was going to increase by up to 1,000 people a year. Now, whether that's right or, regardless of whether you think that's good, bad or indifferent and where you think population policy is going, and we will, as a government, be doing some work on that before Christmas, the reality is that the population is now flatlining, so that we don't have an increased demand on housing from an increasing population. I'm not saying we don't have a demand on housing, because we clearly do, but it's not increasing because the population of the island is increasing. So on that basis, there's no more people here. We identified several hundred sites for several hundred houses in the Bridging Island Plan. Some have been, most of them are in the process of being constructed. Some are still to come. Some fields actually haven't progressed. So it's a mixed bag, if you like. I mean, one thing, it's a little bit of an aside, but I would say this was a 3-year plan. But even those housing sites which came forward, or somebody pushed the button on pretty soon after the Bridging Island Plan debate, it's a long period of time between getting the minister to put some supplementary planning guidance around a particular site, because each site has had its own guidance put to it. By the time the pre-app has come in, the developers have put a scheme together. They worked on the financials, building control. Actually, it's put a spade in the ground to build these homes and deliver them. It doesn't happen in 6 or 9 months. And, there are still sites in the Bridging Island Plan that were identified and rezoned, which haven't come forward. And again, you talk about things that we can do to make things happen. There were sites that were approved that in the Bridging Island Plan that won't come forward because the owners don't want to sell.
I mean, one thing you mentioned, Minister, was that if population had gone the way that the plan forecast, we would probably be having a brand new island plan now because a need would have been assessed to be there.
Yeah.
So in the time that the plan has existed, have your policy officers worked out what the housing need against what the plan provides for is, where that gap is? So in essence, what runway do we have that from the plan provision versus where we actually are?
One of you policy
Go on,
officers.
Kevin, do it.
Well, I think you talked before about how do we assess how policies are working, and we do that in a number of ways. We talk to industry, we talk to our colleagues in the planning applications team, but we also monitor the performance of the plan in terms of the outputs. That's not made particularly easy by the IT system that the planning department currently have, but that issue is getting addressed. So we have to monitor the performance of the plan manually. So what we do is we look at all the planning permissions awarded, and we look at the completions and try to monitor the output of the plan over time. And we aspire to publish monitoring data so that people can see how the plan is performing against key policy objectives, and clearly one of those is around delivery of homes. So we have done some work to look at housing delivery over the plan period, and we've got some high-level numbers associated with that, but it's indicating that the plan is performing quite well. So it had a target of about 4,000 homes, and we think with a combination of completions, work that's on site, and planning permission, that there's around 3,400 homes that are effectively either built or in the pipeline. So, relative to where we were, the plan
that's
is
affordable and also private. That's all
homes.
of them.
That's
So
all homes.
it's an interesting point, a very interesting point for discussion, because while the planning department and the island plan itself may deliver to the point it can deliver, which is approvals for housing, there's no compulsion on anybody to build. And I'm just looking at some, I don't have many stats with me here, but just look at sites over 50 homes that have come forward recently. Les Sablons, 238 homes, site cleared but not started. Apollo Hotel, the same, 79 homes. Romwell's development's been approved, 53 homes not started. Savoy Hotel, 53 not started. The Randall's Brewery site, the first phase is complete. There's 96 homes there, but they're still under construction there. And up at South Hill, there's 139 there, and that site clearance is underway, but that's still to come forward. And I raise the point because the island plan can be as good as it is. The team planning can be working flat out and delivering approvals. The policies can be working well, but you can approve. I don't know how many there are. There probably 400 or 500. There's no compulsion at the end of the day to go off and do it, and there's reasons why. I'm sure every one of those sites that I've just listed hasn't, come forward and started. Some of them there's a number of them, some very big ones, Les Sablons and the Apollo, that they're clear, ready to go, but they're not. So if you're asking, has the policy and has the plan delivered? I guess the answer is it's delivered up to the point that it can, but is it the island plan's job to make houses be built out?
Well, I think Mr. Pilley said that's not the varies of the plan, but on the assumptions, I guess that the plan based some of its evidence on a Statistics Jersey estimate that there was a net shortfall of 1,800 homes during the last plan period. So, I guess what we're trying to get to the bottom of is the plan providing enough housing supply for our current population needs? Does it go further, and does it actually provide almost a surplus in what is being approved, notwithstanding it may not be developed? And what's the impact then on your offices providing an evidence base for what's needed in a new plan? Because I think your point is by the time the end of this term arises, the next minister will need some evidence. So I think just one on population, I guess, and housing, do we have any kind of feeling as to the give and play before we move to the next section?
I mean, I think, you identify when we start the next island plan review, obviously setting a planning assumption for the next plan is critical. And, that will set the framework for what the new plan will need to deliver. And there will need to be there's a political choice there about, what population is the island planning for over the plan period. So first of all, if it's going to be a 10-year plan, we've got a series of projections that have been undertaken, population projections, and on top of that, Stats Jersey have done some modelling that look at those population projections and then look at the housing demand that would arise as a consequence of those population projections. So there's a key political decision to be taken there about what is it that we're planning for as an island, both in terms of population, but also in terms of housing supply. And clearly the island plan doesn't set the population policy, it responds to a population policy and seeks to provide the homes that are required to meet that. So, there's a key political decision to be made there. And as part of that political judgment, a view will have to be taken about how the current plan has performed and was there a shortfall in delivery relative to what actually happened. So, I know you'll ask us about the strategic proposals. One of the key issues in there is around setting a planning assumption. Now, we've started to do some work on that in terms of the household modelling that I've just talked about. But it's very time sensitive, that, because clearly when the decision is made to review the plan, we need to base the decision about setting the next planning assumption on the most up-to-date information that's available at that time. So, we won't take that decision until there's a political decision to review the plan, and we will sit down with our colleagues from Stats Jersey and talk to them about what has actually happened using the data that they've got to the island's population, between whenever that period is and since the last plan was approved.
I mean, at this moment in time, Andium have what we look at here, just shy of 1,000 units in train. They've got they're on site developing 680 of those at the moment. They've got permission for another 90. They're actively working on the planning application for another 120, 130, and another 80 under active consideration. State of Jersey Development Company have got another 700 in a similar situation.
Okay, I'm going to whistle through a few more assumptions as other panel members have a lot of questions for you, and I'm conscious of the time. Briefly touching, and we will touch on the economy focus areas later, but given your focus on the economy and its interaction with planning, there were also assumptions in the Bridging Island Plan on the economy and employment land, whether it be on the general economy or several sectors such as agriculture, the visitor economy, retail, town centre uses, office provision, industrial. There's lots of assumptions in there. So perhaps where you, to what extent have any of the assumptions around employment, land and the economy materialised either in general or in specific focused industries where you've seen a difference between the assumption and the required demand that the plan should deliver, whether it be in land or protecting it or changing it?
Do you want me to pick
Well,
that up while you're
I would
thinking
just
about
start
it?
off with that. Well, I tried to take all that on board, but I think, in my personal view, I think we have failed. Despite some attempts, we've failed to increase the amount of land for light industry, however you wanted to put that, what sort of you put in that bracket, in successive plans now. And there's been reasons for that, but we know that light industrial users, if you like, have challenges from neighbours. I mean, Jersey is like frontier farming. If you were in the UK, all the fields in Jersey are close enough to some neighbours to give you neighbourly issues, if you like, pretty much. And it's not dissimilar with light industry in Jersey, where a lot of our light industrial sites are quite close to residential areas. That gives us challenges. It's a shame that Buncefield and the effect of it made La Collette's it was unhelpful when it came to try to find light industrial spaces down at La Collette. But there's no doubt we've got to work harder, and that's another part of the next island plan. We're going to have to work really hard to try to identify some areas, and I'm confident that we will do that. Kevin?
Well, what I was going to say is I think one of the things to be very conscious of is when we were putting the plan together, and the chair made reference to this at the outset, is we were in the context of COVID and Brexit. So when we were preparing the evidence base for the plan, the economic future of the island was extremely uncertain. So when we did produce an employment study, we attempted to look at the different employment uses in the island by sector, and we attempted to try and predict what might happen to those industries over the plan period in an attempt to try and work out what their planning requirements were. But because of the economic uncertainty that we had at the time, and if you cast your minds back, we didn't really know what was going to happen in the next week, let alone the next few years. It was a very uncertain time.
So this is
very hard. So we provided a policy framework that was very enabling, but it wasn't. There was no specific allocation of land, I think, aside from an amendment I think Deputy Morell brought about a site in St Lawrence. But so there was no, we couldn't translate that assessment of the future into floor space requirements, for example, for a particular sector. So the plan, as the Minister said, is light in terms of making specific allocations of land for particular types of development, other than defining sort of retail areas and things like that.
So this is the focus of, in many ways, what we're asking is, the plan was built on uncertainty. We're really trying to understand what risks and what the impact of extending the plan is, given it was built during a time of uncertainty and knowingly didn't create, in some cases, provision, or knowingly had to build policies based on uncertainty. So are there key examples that now we're kind of leaving the period of uncertainty? We might be entering a new uncertainty, but are there clear examples where the assumptions could cause risk by extending the plan 4, 5, 6 years instead of the 3 years it was meant for?
Sure, but I think the first thing that you need to look at is what is the policy regime preventing, and I would suggest that the policy regime that we've got in place in terms of economic development is supportive. In terms of where that development, if the development's in the right place, then the policy is supportive. And I think in terms of looking to change the plan, we would look to work with our colleagues in the economic development team to develop an evidence base around what the specific requirements are for the next plan. And I think the Minister will talk a little bit more about that in terms of the work that we're going to do with the Economic Development Department generally. But that is a key piece of work, and I think even looking within government, the Economic Department is now a different animal to what it was when we were preparing the island plan, for example. So there are more colleagues in economic development. There is specific focus on different sectors of the island's economy. So I think we will have a richer base to start from in terms of preparing the next plan, and we can then respond to the evidence and the issues that are identified.
I think if there were sectors of the economy which felt they were particularly under pressure from the island plan, I think they would have come forward. And I'm thinking, building's obviously a huge issue. We still have a number of large sites where people can go to buy building materials. Though, scope for expansion if necessary. There's some new stuff coming online at Rue des Prés when it's built out. We know we've had an extensions to the west of the island, a new person come online for provision of building materials, so that's been taken care of. Electricians and plumbers seem to be finding somehow areas to do all their storage, and so we're not seeing people coming to us in that regards. My personal concern was more around hospitality and tourism, particularly, which is when I spoke, we've mentioned Chamber, talk about it. I'm concerned about the shortage of beds, hotel beds in Jersey, because I'm very aware that if we don't maintain a number of hotel beds, then airlines, your EasyJets, your Blue Islands, your British Airways look to the islands and say, why are we putting all these planes on when we know there's not enough beds on the island for tourists to go to stay in? The effect on our connectivity will then, if the downturn, the reduction in tourist numbers affects connectivity, that affects everybody on the island. If we've got less planes, less connectivity happening, it's a really, really big knock-on effect. That the connectivity affects the finance sector, financial services. I mean, I appreciate that the internet's a very different place than it was before COVID came along. But I was just very conscious that for a number of reasons that, the hotel hospitality industry needs more support, which is why, as Kevin said, there are policies in the plan, but I'm seeking to make sure that officers take note of them. But there's been more talk in a spirit of cooperation between policy, development control, regulation and the economy department in the last 12 months than we've had for a very, very long time. There's a lot of interaction, a lot of talking, a lot of discussion going on, and the economy department are going to come forward with some. Trying to describe how they're going to do it. But anyway, there's some rules and not rules and regulations, but this is how they're going to do it.
So are you confident that the policies are good, they're sound to extend, and actually it's a relationship and the implementation alongside economy is the mechanism you need?
What I'm saying is we need to use we can't change the policies in the island plan till the next island plan debate, so it's incumbent upon us and the economy department to make best use of the policies that we do have until such a time as we can have some others. Okay. And I think we certainly have explored making sure that the economy department come forward with proper supporting cases when a large application comes forward, so that the officer can say, right, here's a proper piece of work, this is real material consideration here. The economy department have put forward all these good reasons. This is now a proper material consideration to go alongside the size of the development, too high, too tall, the design, the need, environmental, everything else.
We've got one more assumption. We'll focus on one more assumption, which is that of the requirement of mineral extraction and waste disposal. There were assumptions in the plan about the capacity and demand for waste disposal, likewise for the extraction of minerals, including forecast lifespan of those which you mentioned. So again, is there any impact on extending the plan with regards to the lifespan of those minerals and waste sites?
Well, that's one of the issues that certainly needs to be addressed in relatively short order, because mineral extraction, there's only so much of Jersey and there's only so much of it we can dig out under the Bridging Island plan. We know that there's demand. I mean, it's clear. I mean, the new hospital alone will take a huge chunk of production out of the quarries on the island to be built. That structure alone is going to be a major requirement. I think it's fair to say we know that Rhone have had an extension in the not too far away recent past, and I think Granite Products would like to do the same if they can. But we've had applications from them in the past which have been resisted, certainly before the last island plan. What someone might like to do with their land and what they're allowed to do with their land may be different things for quite a period of time. I don't know, but I'm sure, absolutely sure, that if the handcuffs came off and Granite Products were in a position to expand, I'm sure they would like to do that. But we've certainly got some. We're talking about less concrete. We're trying to move away from carbon. Producing cement and concrete's hugely carbon, but at the same time we're trying to build lots of affordable homes. There's always a balance, but when minerals is certainly something we do have to address, because
that's right.
Sand is now being imported. We stopped sand from Seymour Sandpit, but importing everything has other requirements: storage at the harbour, capacity to unload, all these sorts of things. So it's something we do need to think of. We have 2 quarries on the island. It may be that.
And would this be thinking coming sooner than later? Like, do you see this happening before the end of your political term, or it sits within that wider?
Minerals extraction will certainly be something that will have to be addressed before we debate the next island plan. Because we will need to know what we're doing.
But not necessarily in this term, but at least before the next
but I
island
think
plan.
we know that the issue of minerals was not grappled with by the states previously. We don't really have a long-term supply of minerals. That industry does work on long time scales. We know that Rhone has a certain level of supply. We know that Granite Products has a certain level of supply. We need to look at the island's strategic interest and come up with a plan to deal with that. That is an issue for the next plan. We know that. And likewise, disposal of solid waste, both inert and hazardous waste. We know there are challenges at the Collet, and so the plan, we will need to work with colleagues in I&E to look at options as to how the new
And we
plan would
also
address
know
that.
that Granite Products was identified as the site for the disposal of solid waste,
They have got
which
consent for
hasn't
that.
come forward in the way that we expected, in the time frame that we expected.
That's right.
And as
So
Kevin mentioned, hence some of the pressures at La Collet.
Yeah, don't seem to be too parochial, but you mentioned La Giglan Quarry, and as you say, they've gone public. They want to take it forward. I mean, to get at the mechanics of this, I mean, do you not need to decide on a new policy before they make the planning application, or will their application in due course force you to do so?
Well, the island plan contains a number of policies, and usually you put the application forward, and on balance, it gets approved or there's nothing to stop anybody putting forward any application whatsoever when it comes to island plan. You can put forward an application which doesn't comply with any island plan policies. You're not going to get it passed, but you can put it forward. Now, Granite Products have the ability to put forward an application which challenges the island plan in a number of policy areas. And the job of development control, planning officers, is to weigh up the policies and decide whether the application is worthy of approval or not. You know, we get green zone policies, we get any number of policies that, green zone applications, we get all sorts of things that challenge the island plan in the way, in the form of an application during any island plan time period. And planning committee members will know, you know, it's not unusual.
There is provision in the law that allows decision makers to approve something that's contrary to the island plan, but only where they think there's sufficient justification to do so. So, you know, depending on the evidence that's submitted to support the application, if it's in front of planning committee members will look at the proposal, look at the benefits that the proposal is purporting to deliver. And then they will weigh that against the island plan policy.
Just trying to work out the mechanism.
In terms of they've got two options. They either submit a planning application against the current plan, where there's no specific policy provision to approve an extension of the site, or they await the review of the plan and see if that comes forward with a more favourable policy regime.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think we'll pass on to Deputy Coles, who's going more into those different proposals and where you are at.
Thank you. So just a little preamble, Minister, as the Bridging Island Plan outlined areas of work for or policies to develop called proposals within the BIP during the life of the plan. Some of these were to assist in the building the evidence base for the next Island Plan review, and others to assist the implementation of policy. The panel has been keen to understand the progress of these work streams. In the letter you provided to the panel on the 5th of February 2025, detailing the latest RAG status for each of the Bridging Island Planned proposals, out of the total of 40 proposals, 8 were complete, 17 in progress, 12 were yet to commence, and 3 were commenced but subsequently deferred or held as pending. Minister, can you confirm whether all 12 of the outstanding Bridging Island Plan policies have now commenced?
Well, I don't know about the number 12, but I can confirm that not everything has commenced yet, because we don't have the time, resource, officers to do the work. You know, Kevin is not a one-man band anymore, but he has a huge amount of work on his plate. We've recently recruited a new officer. We have, which would make a big difference, and the new officer's going to be a great asset to the policy department. But at the end of the day, there's only a certain amount of, only 24 hours in a day, and Kevin will tell you. And not only does policy have to develop all this work that we said we were going to do, but I mean, I don't know, but I imagine during the course of a normal day, the email either pings or the phone rings, and there's questions and things that need to be done just at the spur of the moment all the time, which means that it's difficult to get on with the stuff that we know we have to do. But we are making progress. There's another, you mentioned the status of some of these things, but some of them are a challenge. They're a little way off yet, but we will have to try our best to get through them all before the next Island Plan debate. I would say I'm not sure if we have to do them all before the next Island Plan debate, because some may well be left over. Because if we have to wait for everything, we may find we don't get there.
Yeah, I think the status of the plan, so the legal elements of the plan are the policies and the plan and the map. The proposals, as you've suggested, Deputy, are there to complement the plan framework and to, in some cases, to help deliver the policies that are in the plan. So some examples might be some new supplementary guidance to help some of the policies, implementation of some of the policies in the plan. And as we've just talked about, some of the other proposals are there to develop new bits of evidence base that will support the next plan. Clearly, if that evidence isn't gathered, then there's just risk that the plan in being brought forward may not be deemed to be as robust as it might be, and obviously members will then have a choice about what it is they approve in the plan. So, if we look at some of the proposals, there's talk about doing master plans for the west of the island and places like Five Oaks. Now, from a planning perspective, it would be great to be able to do a detailed piece of work looking at both of those areas and look at the opportunities, challenges and threats for new development in those areas. Clearly, if we're not able to deliver those master plans, we may get proposals that emerge as part of the Island Plan review, and members will just have to look at those in the cold light of day without the benefit of having a planning framework that supports any sites that might come forward. So,
some of it is sort of a bit of chicken and egg in a way, and Five Oaks is an interesting case in point. At the last Bridging Island Plan debate, we had a number of sites at Five Oaks which were proposed, most of which got rejected. Had more of them been approved, I think the requirement for a Five Oaks master plan would have been strong. And I think that would have had to almost jump to the top of the list of work that had to be done imminently, because it's clear that if we're going to do a lot more development in the Five Oaks area, we need to think holistically about traffic and community and all sorts of stuff. The west of Ireland has been pushed up the list a bit. We've had a state's proposition for that. I mean, both areas are really equally important. I mean, I'm really looking forward to the West of Ireland piece of work when it's done, because I think there's fantastic opportunity there for private individuals, for business, for all sorts of reasons. I think there's a lot of potential in the west of the island. And I'm looking at some of this other work which we haven't started yet. But I mean, there's no doubt that I'm not going to. Somebody might shoot me down. I'm not going to prioritise guidance on the shopfront supplementary planning guidance over something like Five Oaks master plan. It may not be a very big piece of work, but there's some things on the list here which clearly aren't quite as important as others. I mean, I wish something like shopfronts was the most important thing we had to consider, but unfortunately it's not.
Just perhaps for the panel's information, we've updated this as of July, so we will send this to the panel post the meeting if that's helpful.
That'd be good, thank you.
That's fine. And I actually believe most of those questions have been answered.
I think for me then, where you obviously haven't necessarily done that prioritisation yet, and we've just talked about the assumptions as well, that there is a lot under the underlying assumptions of work needing to be done ahead of the next Island Plan, and so there's a lot to put on the officers, not only on this, but also kind of preparing for the next.
I mentioned the chicken and egg bit, and I never got to quite it, because I sort of went off track and delayed myself. But the Five Oaks is interesting. Do we develop a Five Oaks master plan, which then helps developers to come forward with sites, or do we wait for the plan to be proposed and approved before we do the work? Because in some cases, if we're going to do the work and then it's not going to be used because sites don't get approved in Five Oaks, we have got other things to do other than spend time developing policies which are never going to get used. So I don't know which one is more important there.
I am assuming that a framework or looking at a wider community area is not just looking at where you would put more houses, but it's about that distribution of community spaces and
absolutely,
and of all the other elements that are in the Bridging Island Plan. So it's not just about a particular field that would have housing on that development. proposal would bring. It would
No, we're
hopefully
talking about
widen
community. I mean, certainly, you know, I have responsible in St Martin for part of Mofor. Most of Mofor is in St Saviour's. It's a big chunk of housing which has very little in the way of community facilities. It's got a shop, it's got a garage, or two shops actually, and a garage. That's about it. If one was to develop a site like Mofor further, I'm absolutely sure that there would be a lot more community. It's of a size now. Community would have to feature very, very heavily. So there would have to be a lot more facilities for community.
And how, then coming back to my question, I suppose, before we move on, is how are you going to prioritise this work, understanding the time restraint, resources restraint, and office restraint to do this work between at least now and the end of your term?
There's a very flippant answer that I mustn't give because it will be on the front page of the Evening Post. We're going to try our very best to do everything we can between now and the next election. We've identified some pieces of work we can do within PERDA, which you know, not significant, but there are some pieces that we've agreed we'll do within PERDA. But we'll do what we can. We have a long list of things which are in train. We have a long list of things that we know we need to start. And as I said, the team's just been supplemented in the policy department for planning and
But you're doing a specific prioritisation from that perspective of, as you've just said, for shop fronts versus
we have some
Five
priority
Oaks.
work, and I mean in the immediate short term, and Kevin and I have discussed quite very recently the guidance that we're going to put out in the next couple of months, in the next some of it in the next few weeks, and there are yeah, work is in train on a number of different subjects, and just depends on how things work out with priorities and emergencies coming through the door and assistance needed from the policy department with planning work, because you know, large applications come in and development control officers will come to policy and say, you know, can we have a chat about this? I mean, you meet DC on a regular basis, don't you, Kevin?
We do. And I think the other thing I'd say is, you know, some of the proposals that are set out in the plan don't sit within the Environment Minister's portfolio. You know, there might be other parts of government that might lead those. So, well, I suppose Marine Spatial Plan sits in your portfolio, but it was largely led by our colleagues in Marine Resources. We obviously supported them in terms of the planning elements of that. So, you know, some of it's not wholly dependent on the resource within our team, and we are dependent.
I think where
on
we're
other
trying to get
colleagues.
to is, you know, would we see ahead of the island plan, kind of, well, before you start looking at the assumptions again, which you were just, you know, we were just talking about, and needing those to help, or a new set of assumptions to help develop an island plan, what we would see as prioritisation under those strategic proposals and proposals that you need to have done kind of ahead of the next island plan.
I
And
mean, I think I mentioned it. I mentioned it half an hour ago. There will be a process. I'm sure we're going to do some work before the next election on the very basics for what we need to do for the next island plan debate. Yeah. And I think that conversation will certainly happen. And within that conversation, I think you're right. I think there will be a list of things that we said we might do, or things we will do, things we'd like to do. And we're going to have to chop that up and move it around and say, right, let's pick a date for the start. How many of these things do we absolutely have to get done? And
Before
we'll have
that
to find
date.
a way to get them
Yeah.
done. Other things, you know, what's nice to have, what's actually, okay, we can miss those off or drop them off and say, right, there's a time scale here. This is the amount of work we're going to have to get done before we start the next island plan debate. And we will need to start it here, so work backwards and say, right, this is the resource required to get through that.
thank
And
you.
I think the other way of prioritisation, and we hinted at this in the Bridging Island Plan, is some of them are called strategic proposals as opposed to proposals. And, you know, if you look at the strategic proposals, there are 5 of them. So we've talked about the long-term planning assumption. That's critical, but that's time sensitive, so that won't happen until we get to the review itself. We've talked about the long-term requirements for the energy market, and colleagues are working very much in that space in terms of energy policy, offshore wind, etc. Marine spatial plan's been completed. West of Island planning framework, we see that as strategically important because, as you'll know, there's been very much a focus on the built-up areas in the island, delivering most of the island's development needs, but particularly St Helier in previous island plans. The purpose of looking at a West of Island planning framework is to look at the opportunities for development in the west of the island. You know, Le Canave was identified as a secondary centre. What opportunities exist for Le Canave and other parts of the west of the island to accommodate more development, if that's what the island needs in the next plan period. So that piece of work is what we would see it as strategically significant in that respect. And the Minister's already touched on some elements about infrastructure. So, you know, we've talked about waste, we've talked about minerals, there's issues around coastline, coastal defence. So, you know, we will need an understanding within government what our colleagues and other ministers, what their policy objectives are in terms of their portfolios, particularly where they deal with aspects of the island's infrastructure, be that the sort of dirty end dealt with at INE, or whether it's community infrastructure, sort of schools, hospitals, those sorts of facilities. So, you know, we will need an understanding of that from colleagues as to what they think the island's requirements are over the next plan period. So, you know, those five are some of the big ticket items.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think just going on maybe to the Conotab about supplementary planning guidance specifically, you've touched on
conscious of
already.
time, so yes, the panel understands that supplementary planning guidance related to residential space standards, parking and glass houses has now been completed. First, can you please provide an update as to how the completed SPGs are working in practice?
Well, when it comes to residential space guidance, as one of the Deputy Coles has been extremely patient with me. In fact, I'm surprised he's been as patient as he has. And Kevin and I have had a chat about this even today, and we're just about there, and we will be putting that out. We obviously, I'm very grateful for your patience and forbearing in the time. So, I did do a number of site visits. And we've all been a bit pushed to get it done, but it is going to come out. Other pieces of work which are in train to be published fairly shortly, St Saviour's Hospital, where we feel that we've done a lot of work on potential for St Saviour's Hospital. Do you want me to carry on? Do you want to talk about
It was
St
more
Saviour's?
about how they're working in practice now, the
more
current SPGs. Like, how do they see that's been useful?
Well, parking is a very interesting one and pertinent, because we have very recently had a proposal which is going to come to the States Assembly. I think it's going to be here. Parking is always challenging. People get very emotional about parking, and you can understand why. We hadn't changed the parking standards since the last
30-something years.
And it's been a huge number of years since we changed. Anyway, the decision was made that we would go for new parking standards. A lot of work was done, a lot of consultation was done, and unsurprisingly, the changes have not pleased everybody, and that's the way it happens. And there are a number of challenges from not only in St Helier, but outside of St Helier. No doubt, in my mind, that there's going to be quite a vigorous debate on the proposition from the Constable about parking standards, and I think the department and myself are well aware that there will be a number of politicians who are not happy. We know in the middle of town where there's no requirement, minimum is 0. And we know a lot of areas now where we have got some rezoned sites out of St Helier, but are close to amenities, shops, schools, parish halls, green spaces, and most importantly, bus routes. We've said those areas, the minimum requirement is 1 car parking space per unit. And a lot of constables and a lot of roads committees and people are not happy, because what we have seen in recent years is cars being parked and live in all sorts of places we've never seen them before, purely because residents can get away with leaving them there. There's no law that says they can't be left there. Country lanes, other areas where there's no payment required. It's been a real challenge. I mean,
Is there anything else on the bit more than parking, but in the other elements?
Yeah,
as
I was going
well?
to talk about, so the constables asked about how they're working. When the plan was approved, there was an explicit focus on developing reviewing the supplementary planning guidance that was focused on housing. And clearly the components of housing relate to the space standards, the residential space standards, that is, the parking standards and density. It's clearly when an architect sits down with a blank sheet of paper, they need to look at all of those elements to work out what the site can deliver. So the fact that we've developed new guidance in some cases for density, revised space standards and parking standards has meant that the rezoned housing sites, for example, have been able to come forward and to deliver homes that meet with the policy objectives that are set out in the plan, which was to make best use of land, so to optimise density. Clearly, we've got a sustainable transport policy that's trying to encourage less car use and to promote other forms of transport. So this is where the planning system can help deliver those objectives. And so I think from an integrated policy point of view, we would suggest that those standards are working well. The Minister's made reference to some of the rezoned housing sites. What's important to remember, I think, is in most cases, except for the middle of town, the parking standards are minimum parking standards, and developers have choice about the level of parking that they provide. And we've seen some developers have adhered very closely to the minimum standards because they want to optimise their yield on the site. Other developers have taken a choice that they provide some overage over and above the minimum standard. So they've made a decision that they will produce a certain level of yield and they will provide some additional parking for perhaps some larger homes on the site. So, I think the things like parking standards need to be taken in the round and they need to be considered against the density standards which have encouraged developers to increase yield. Parking standards, they've got a choice whether they can lower them to a minimum. And then, in addition to that, we've got the space standards, which have also tried to ensure that we're providing good quality homes for people and we're not building homes that are substandard. So, there are choices there that developers have to make in terms of how they come forward with schemes. But I think, a number of those rezoned sites now have got consent. We've got some good yield on those sites, and hopefully they're going to be creating good living environments in terms of the quality of the homes, but also the environments that are being created on those sites. So I think all of those bits of guidance have helped to achieve that.
Yeah, well, thanks, Dr. Fisher. I just on the subject of glass houses, you mentioned that. I mean, I know the one is where one particular planning application has been paused following a submission by the Cabinet Office on reviewing glass houses. Is there more work going on in that respect?
Well, we issued some supplementary planning guidance on greenhouses last year.
Yeah, I think it's the case you're talking about related to the application for the solar farm.
Yeah, I'm trying to be more general rather than that, but that's what prompted the thought.
Okay. Well,
yes.
I think the policy regime that's set for glass houses in the plan talks about, there's a general presumption against the redevelopment of glass houses. However, there is some encouragement given to the potential for glass house sites being used for the provision of renewable energy, like solar arrays, in the sense that clearly they are not entirely dissimilar in terms of forms of development. So that was one of the challenges, I think, in some of the applications that we've had for solar arrays, was the applicant demonstrating that they'd given enough credence to examining alternative options, including reusing derelict glasshouse sites for that type of development. So that's why that issue was raised in the context of that.
Okay, I don't want to go off piece on that one.
That's on the public record. It's all there as background to the application.
Thank you. And you've explained how the SPGs have actually helped the housing situation. And do you believe that you do believe, obviously, that these completed SPGs are supporting the Bridging Island plan in the way that you or the previous minister intended?
There's
a constraint, isn't there? Yeah.
They can't do other than support the island plan in as much as SPGs can't go against the policy. All they can do is to add detail and guidance, which is, it says on the tin. It's a way of, the policy says that, and the SPG will allow you to do this, but it won't allow, I can't issue an SPG which goes against policy. So it is literally that.
I mean, generally speaking, when policies are agreed, I mean, do you anticipate that SPGs will be necessary in many cases?
Yes,
to
I
supplement?
think so. I mean, talking about individual rezoned housing sites, for example, each one has had an individual specific SPG issued with it, which gives additional, the policy says that field is going to be rezoned for affordable housing, and the SPG comes along with some more detail as to how we would like to see that site developed, and a lot of considerations which the developer can then put that into the mix of when he comes to crunching the numbers, and SPGs on housing sites are very useful to both sides because it allows us to indicate in far more detail what we're looking to see, and the developer can say, right, this is exactly what they're looking for. We need to come up with a plan which ticks the vast majority of those boxes.
Okay. And moving forward, I mean, how are you assessing the SPGs within the current Bridging Island plan against the anticipated future need? For instance, what are the impacts in this area in the BIP being extended? I mean, do they help to avoid a new island plan? Can you cope with the present island plan with more SPGs?
I suppose, do they help to avoid? And I don't, it may be in a very small way, but at the end of the day, the policies are the policies, and they have to stay the policies until the new island plan is debated. So while an SPG can help to the detail of a policy, if we have a fundamental challenge to a particular sector of the island plan, any number of SPGs is not going to change that, in as much as the policy has to remain the policy and the SPG can't go away from policy.
Yeah. So in terms of whether or not we have a full island plan in the future, the SPGs they're helpful for the moment, but they're not material to a new island plan.
Not as such.
Yeah.
I think, is there any, you mentioned that there is a list of course, that you're going to carry on issuing SPGs on a number of areas. Is there any that you have come across that you, or any elements of the policy that have come across that you think that there needs to be an SPG that hadn't been thought of before? Something that a letter that we received raised, for example, archaeology, for example, like looking specifically at archaeology and developing an SPG on that. Have you seen that there needs to be a bit more, or to add on to the list of?
Well, strangely enough, I came across my desk yesterday. I think there's a proposal going to the Assembly on some changes to historics when it comes to archaeology, rules around treasure.
Yeah, there's a new
finding of, and
economic development minister's bringing forward a heritage law which will deal with some aspects of archaeology.
Okay.
There is supplementary planning guidance on planning and archaeology. It does require review. So part of that is around process in terms of how people engage with the planning application process on issues of archaeology. So we are conscious that requires revision, and it's on our list of
it's on
things to do.
It's on the long list
of things we know we need to do.
Okay, well, maybe moving on. Thank you, Conatab. I mean, we've talked a lot about the rezoning affordable homes. So I want to maybe focus in for example. Minister, for the benefit of those listening, can you describe what the term affordable housing means in the context of the Bridging Island Plan? To what extent has the price paid for land impacted the viability of housing developments and affordability for buyers?
Well, I can't talk specifically about any particular site about how the price paid for the land has affected the viability, but it must be clear to anyone listening or anyone involved in this type of, that more you pay for the land, the more effect it has on the viability of a project. And I think this is where I come back to what I said very much earlier, is the cost of these projects per plot, per house, if you like now, is to the point where the states mustn't be surprised if they're asked to have an increasingly large chunk of the equity if we're going to have a shared equity scheme. I think I sort of get the hint of where you're going, and we have had some proposals, have we or not? I'm trying to think now, where there might have been a scheme which would limit the amount or would dictate the amount of money paid for a particular affordable housing site based on whatever that was, you know, the number of OGs or the number of units or whatever, a scheme to yet to be produced. And it is clear and has been clear to me for some time that some people, some owners, benefit greatly from the benefit of from a rezoned housing site that they own, but they want more money than developers are prepared to offer, because we know affordable housing is what it says on the tin. It's not open market housing. It's not the ability to build large luxury properties which sell for many millions of pounds. And in some cases, people do calculations based on other sites which have been developed for open market, and they think, oh, my site must therefore be worth X millions, when in actual fact in affordable housing terms it's not at all, because if you're going to pay that much, it adds 20, 30, 50, £100,000 to the price of the plot.
Do you think that this mechanism needs to be developed ahead of the next island plan to try to limit that kind of push from landowners to do that, knowing that we probably will, as you've talked about, need to be, you know, even from the government side, developing more equity schemes or having to pay that kind of the extra, which includes potentially land
As
costs?
I said earlier, I'm not a great one for, you know, I'm a free market economy man, and just because somebody has the ability to build homes on a field that they own, I'm not sure that we necessarily need to be forcing them, but we have spoken about various things that we can do. I mean, compulsory purchase is not somewhere particularly I would choose to go, but it's also clear in the policy that a rezoned site where if it doesn't come forward, you know, if the building doesn't come forward, I would be very much happier to take that rezoning away and return that field back to agriculture, and say to the owner, you know, you've had the ability to develop this field through the Bridging Island Plan debate. You've chosen not to. That's your choice, but you don't retain the ability to do that in the future. You get one chance. And I have said that to people when I was previously minister, where small fields were rezoned and the owner wanted more and more and more. And I said, well, if you don't, you know, I'm quite happy to take the rezoning away. It didn't happen, but that we need to think about measures, and it can't be. No, it can't be right that somebody, through the decision of the States Assembly and an island plan debate, the value of their land increases astronomically overnight. And I don't want to be in a position where I'm forcing anybody to do anything at all, but I take your point on board. We could go into an island plan debate with 10 sites, which we absolutely need because the requirement is for, let's say, X thousand homes, and we identify we want to do that, and then the owners of the land has the ability to say, no, we need to find a mechanism which will allow us to do something in fairly short order. Now, whether it's saying these 10 sites haven't come forward, we gave them 6 months and they said, no, we're not selling, fine, we'll take it away, we'll find another 10 sites. I don't know, that would probably need another island plan debate. Would we have a list of sites at an island plan debate, say, right, we'll do the top 10. If these don't come forward, we'll just keep going down the list till we've got to the number of homes.
So all these you know, different kind of ideas, I mean, would these need to be basically, do you feel as Minister now would feel that is something that absolutely needs to happen ahead of the next island plan, to come up with some kind of mechanism to, because it's a gap, identified as a gap, and potentially needs to...
I think it's something which we could certainly discuss when we come to those first meetings, when we decide how we're going to approach the new island plan project. But sitting here now, I'm not sure is the answer to that question, in as much as we've not done it before. Generally speaking, we've managed to deliver enough homes through the island plan process.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that the challenge is there, but
Yeah, I was going to say, I think those, if you look at successive island plans, there have been different routes to delivering affordable homes, from states delivering sites themselves, states loan sites. There's been, the current mechanisms that we've got now. So as part of the review of any, or part of the review of a current island plan would be to look at how the policies worked. And did it deliver?
you mentioned it right at the outset. Our policy's delivering.
Did it do what it strove to do? But being cognizant of that, we also need to be cognizant of the sort of limitations of the planning system, and this is where, the planning system can work alongside other policy levers. And clearly, the Minister for Housing controls the Affordable Housing Gateway, which is the mechanism that we've used to ensure that the delivery of homes that are delivered through the island plan are occupied by people who are in housing need, be that for rent or for purchase. So, this is where the planning system can work alongside other policy tools to deliver a particular objective. And I think that review would need to look at all elements of the policy landscape in terms of how the plan might work in the future.
Louise.
Yeah, maybe if I can add as well, if you think about where we were as government prior to the last island plan, and where we'll be when we go into a new process. Of course, we've now got a strategic housing and regeneration unit who are supporting the Minister for Housing in delivering their policies, and also much more of an understanding of the data around, the housing issues that the island faces. So I think, as Kevin said, and the Minister, when we go into the next process, a bit like with the economy team, we're in a much better position to understand the landscape, the relevance of the particular policy levers that you might use, and therefore be in a better position to fully understand what the plan can and should do to deal with the housing issues. And is it worth now perhaps talking about how a new plan might be formed or used differently to be more responsive to housing? Because I think we've all appreciated, haven't we, that housing is one of the more responsive issues that can often change during a long plan period if you're going back to a process where you have a 10-year plan, for example. And it could be, you've seen that the Minister's gone out to consultation on a number of issues in the planning process, but specifically about what the new island plan might look like as a document. And does it necessarily just repeat what we've done before, or is it something that might have a different model approach? And there's no decisions made there, are there? But the thought could be, one option could be that you have a sort of overriding strategic plan and more responsive parts of the plan to particular issues that change more rapidly. And as we've seen, the island's population is not doing what it used to do, which is, be an obvious and always upward trend, although we know that increasing the population is important for economic recovery potentially. So it could be that you have a process where the plan is able to be more responsive to the impact of different housing policies and the requirement on housing sites as a result of that. So you could look at a different format for the future to be more helpful.
One thing I certainly would want to do, if it is me, and I don't know if I get the chance to change the rules before, but we changed the rules for the COVID BIP, that the whole plan had to be rewritten. One, previously it was possible to look at a particular section on its own in isolation, and I think it's vital that we get back to that situation, because I can foresee in the future, a decade is a very long time for a plan, and it's absolutely not impossible that 2 or 3 years into a new island plan, some part of it needs to change dramatically because of global or international pressures or for whatever reason. And I don't think it's right that the only way to come back is to have to review the whole thing when a particular section, it might be water, it might be coastal, it might be infrastructure, it might be some policy that just has to change because of something that's happened. So I'm looking certainly to do that.
Minister, when you were talking about not wanting to force people to do anything, the Bridging Island Plan sets out the 15% of new housing developments would be made available to islanders eligible to assisted purchase housing. In the current context, do you believe the 15% threshold for new housing developments still remains relevant?
So this is under the H6. This
Yeah.
is
This is the over 50.
These are the-
over 50.
Over
These
50
are the
units
private
that have the
sites, yeah.
15%, yeah.
It's a debate which I think you could go round in circles on, and I can see both sides of the argument, but it is important that affordable houses are built, because we need those. I'm not 100% wedded to we have to have this percentage on any development over a certain number of units, but I can see the need for it. I do tend to think that we could do better, in as much as some sites could yield financially very much more money, with money that could be then ploughed into other schemes, which could be better for everybody. But the Assembly's taken the view that it's important that, regardless of where a site is, if it's a really good site, bad site, if it has a view or not, or for whatever reason it's close to, if it's over 50 units, there must be a percentage, and that percentage may change.
Yeah.
I'm not wedded one way or the other particularly.
But I think this goes back to the issue about mechanisms for delivering affordable homes. So clearly we have rezoned sites that are specifically allocated for this purpose. H6 is a new policy that introduces this notion of the private sector delivering a proportion of affordable homes. And clearly there are potential effects on viability of those schemes. Now, if you think about the current challenging economic climate for development, changing any of those parameters would affect the viability of those schemes, and we would need some evidence to what the impact of change might be before the Minister made any of those sorts of changes. And I think the other thing we'd say, that policy is sort of relatively early in its use. Whilst it was approved in the plan, it came into effect when the guidance was published in 2023. So, we've only seen a limited number of schemes, and the Minister referred to some of them earlier, which haven't started. So
the vast majority of them
yeah.
aren't being built, and some are in process, but none are finished yet.
Yeah, I think on my last questions here, and it's something the panel has reflected on before, in that around community spaces and how much within the kind of affordable housing developments, but in wider new housing developments in general, how much does kind of community space, both indoor and outdoor, is factored into decision making in that, and does the Bridging Island Plan kind of help to provide more community space?
Well, I think it does, and we've spoken about the parking guidance, but in creating minimum limits for things like parking, green space, amenity space, car parking space, interior space, the size of rooms. Every time we introduce another limit, we make it more challenging to make all the numbers add up. And, you start off with a particular site of a particular size, and you say, well, we really need to do a certain number of homes, and then you start to think about the minimum parking, minimum green, amenity space, community space, and you bin space and other things that you need to do, and you very quickly find that there's not very much left, and you think, well, actually, we'd like to build these houses a bit bigger, but and then the number of units on the site very quickly starts to become impacted.
But do you think community space then, kind of, you were talking earlier about the weighting and needing to make decisions from a weighting perspective. Do you feel that community space just gets the same amount of weighting as other elements in looking at since the Bridging Island Plan has come up, and the different schemes that have been agreed?
I think certainly we're an awful lot more conscious of the importance that community space plays in ambience, if you like, of any development. But we have to strike this balance between providing as much amenity of the various different sorts for the people who are going to live on the site. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the developer has to develop the scheme in a way that somebody's going to pay him the money to do the job. If it's an affordable scheme and it's Andium or it's states or what have you, obviously there's a certain business model there. But if you're a developer, private developer, you're looking for a return on your investment, and you get to a point where you think, well, if I can't get more than X number of units on the site, all of a sudden the scheme becomes unviable. But I know it's not community space per se, but driving around the latest developments, trying to think the name of the hotel, was it the Mayfair Hotel that's just just finishing. Anyway, I drove along since coming here this morning. I've driven along the Ring Road, St Saviour's Road there, and it's quite clear some of these states-led developments, affordable. We've got some lovely big open spaces between the development and the road. In the past, where we've had private developers pushing right up to the boundary with tall buildings. So I know that's not community space per se, but it certainly gives a feeling of thinking a lot more about the community that are living in that area, where there's a lot more space outside. The MPs on the planning committee will know the importance that applications now put to community space, and I wish we could have more. I would be very happy to have a lot more green open space in St Helier, because I know how much difference it makes to the people who live here.
So the supplementary planning guidance on residential space standards sets minimum space standards for flatted development and housing development. So the minimum standards are set there. I suppose the other thing I would say is when we produced the Bridging Island Plan, we introduced a new policy that required specific provision for children's play space in addition to open space as well. So, we've tried to ensure that the plan can deliver good places that support people's health and well-being and enable children to play.
Play space is an SVG, which is on the list to be done as well.
Yeah. But the policy hook is there in the plan.
Yeah.
So, and we have seen, dedicated play space come forward as part of some of these schemes.
Thank you. And moving to Deputy Coles, some of the elements we've touched on already around economic factors.
Yes. During the State's debate on the 21st of January, you said you would issue guidance and use other things at my disposal to assist the construction industry during the times of inflationary pressures before the next Island Plan debate. What specific planning-related guidance and procedural changes will you introduce to support builders under current inflationary pressures and material shortage?
Well, I mean, my ability to do stuff and my intention might not be quite the same thing, but I'm trying my best where I can to help. But actually, in reality, my ability to make changes in that regard probably is quite limited. We've spoken about my intention to try to help hospitality and hotels in particular, and there are policies in the plan, but as we've said all the way through this, I can't change policy until we get to the next Island Plan debate, and some fortunate politician's going to have the ability to take the next Island Plan debate to the Assembly, and they will have the chance then, as will all other elected members, to work on how the policy and the Island Plan comes forward. But I think I've just tried during my tenure as Minister to encourage people to work together, to talk to each other, to see what the art of the possible is inside the policies that we have, knowing that we can't change them. So, I do stand up in the States and say that I want to encourage and help where I can, and I do what I can, but I can't change policy, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's been, following the Minister's statements, we've been working with colleagues in economic development to look at how decision makers might give greater consideration to the economic value of development proposals. And so as part of that, we'll be looking at how both applicants and the planning department can consider and assess economic value as part of a planning application, so that you as decision makers sitting on the planning committee can be presented with some information about what is the value of this development to the island's economy, what contribution will it make, so then you can have greater regards to that as a material consideration in your weighing of planning factors. So that work is live. I think we've used the Industry Partnership Board, where there are people at Jersey Business and other development colleagues who sit on there. They can provide some useful practical advice as to how applicants and business might support their proposals with more information about what the economic value of their proposal is. So I don't think it's about changing the policy landscape, but it's about ensuring that more information about economic value is presented as part of planning applications, so that decision makers can have a look at that and take a considered view about it, and that works ongoing and will hopefully be issued shortly.
I mean, you talk about you work closely with the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development. Are there any other ministers? We've got the Minister of Housing's got key parts of this. Minister of Infrastructure's got key parts of this. So, what kind of conversations go on in between across those portfolios with yourselves in developing the policies and ideas and concepts within the island plan?
I have to say that I don't have a great deal of discussion with other ministers about the island plan per se. Generally, I get correspondence, emails, phone calls away from other ministers about where they are where they have people under their remit who are experiencing challenges which are put forward by either the planning department or what have you, or people are not able to do things that they'd like to do because they've come up against a planning officer or policy or an SPG, or they just don't seem to be making progress. But I'd like to think that any minister that has difficulty with something under my remit would come and see me, and they do generally, and email me and ask if what can be done here, or what assistance. And generally it's a question I find of getting people together and talking to them goes a long way sometimes. I know one of the big strides that we've made in the planning reform is that there's a lot more discussion goes on face to face between the officers and applicants or complainant or what have you, and talking about stuff seems to work really well.
I think in the context of preparing an island plan, we set up there's a whole system of governance that's set up both at an officer level and at a political level. So if you take the Bridging Island Plan, for example, we had a programme board with representation from interests across government, and then that was reflected politically as well. So there was a subgroup of Council of Ministers who sought to ensure that their portfolio interests were reflected in the plan. So, I think it's important to look at the plan not just as a set of regulatory rules that are used for planning applications, but it's there to deliver and enable the community's objectives over the plan period. And of course, they aren't just, limited to pure planning issues. There are other ministers will have political objectives and policy aspirations that the plan can help to deliver. So we do set up that governance, and we try to ensure that the plan represents and sets out a piece of integrated policy reflecting other objectives from other parts of government.
And, sorry, just to say that would be, I'm sure, the plan going into the next island plan preparation process, because it is about that pre-work of getting the policies as fit for purpose as possible, and then obviously they fly free and you start to see them enact and monitor where they're really giving you the outcomes you hoped for, and then you've got the chance to pivot at the next island plan process.
So staying on the economy in this section, I noted interestingly in an inspector's report yesterday published your commentary on the factor of on the importance of the economy was considered by them to be now a material factor in applications. And you mentioned that helping applicants with business plans and such is one thing, but are there other tools at your disposal to assist in implementing the Bridging Island Plan to help support your ambition of the economy? For example, issuing statements that become material, issuing supplementary planning guidance. What's at your disposal to ensure this remains a solid base to achieve your ambition?
Well, I was personally very heartened to read that section of that inspector's report, and it jumped out at me when I thought, well, that's very interesting. This particular inspector thinks my speech at Chamber of Commerce is a material consideration. Up to that time, I had wondered, because I greatly appreciated the opportunity to talk to Chamber that day, and I indicated the direction of travel that I wanted to go in. But when I get back to the department and realising that I can't change the policies in the island plan, what can I do? And of course, speaking to policy officers, we've devised a scheme now where the economy department are going to come forward with very much more information, and they're going to do it in a way that planning officers can use. I don't think I can change anything. You talk about it's a material consideration, that's great, but I don't think I have a great deal of ability to get a chunk of black and white document put down that has to be dropped into every officer's desk every time an application comes through. It's being done through enhanced applications and input from the economy department as a consultee. When we get to the next island plan, it may well be that one could put forward an updated policy on the economy, which gives an even more, and then at that point, that's when you really start to make a difference, where something you say in a speech gets dropped into an actual policy, and then officers say, right, okay, this is real proper material consideration.
I think just going back to that case, there clearly is a policy that supports that sort of use, so it is material to a decision in relation to that type of use. Decision makers will, of course, need to balance the value of that proposal against its impact. And I think what the Minister is saying is that in the current context, sometimes the economic value of applications is not developed, it's not really presented as part of a planning application. I think to enable decision makers to perhaps weigh that against the environmental impact, which is quite often quite well developed as part of a planning application, more work needs to be done in that economic space so that you as decision makers can say, oh yeah, I can appreciate what this is going to do, and I can balance that against its impact, and then you can make an informed decision. So that's the work that's in train.
Yeah, I think in the past we may have had an application over here, for example, and it might have been or whatever, and there might be 3 or 4 lines supporting from the economic department. So this is an important application. The economy department wants to support it wholeheartedly. Full stop. That's not good enough. We need all the reasons behind the economy department wanting to support it, why it's good for the island, why it's good for the economy, why it's good for St Helier, or what have you. And that is what we're going to achieve through discussions between officers and working out how we can do the job better.
Yeah, thank you.
I suppose the last question I want to come across is, how has the Bridging Island Plan help manage the change of use of land and buildings, for example, from agricultural use to dry storage? And to what extent has any loss of agricultural use been assessed in regards to the agricultural industry?
There's a challenging question. Where do we start? Farmers were given permission, historically, farmers have been given permission to build sheds for agricultural use, and the idea always was that if the agricultural use fell away, the shed would be removed, and the land would return or whatever. But I think actually in reality, of course, that's not happened. Over the course of a number of years, a number of applications for change of use, farm buildings that have become redundant, especially more modern ones, have been adapted to meet the requirements of certain parts of the industry. And we mentioned light industry before, and we've spoken about storage requirements for plumbers and electricians, and a large electrician firm needs quite a large space for the storage of all the bits and pieces that they need. So the two have sort of worked in balance. Whether they were quite as it was always intended, I'm not sure. And it was always a challenge where at one end of a country lane a farmer would be applying to build an agricultural shed, where at the other end of the country lane a farmer was applying to change of use of a country shed. And I know the difficulty in working on a farm where a lot of your storage is off-site, and in some cases a long way off-site. It doesn't help with productivity, it doesn't help with a whole load of things. It has to be said that the farming industry and redundant agricultural shed have filled a need that was there in the economy to most, to many extents. I think most of them have been used up now, but you know, we always need agricultural sheds while we've got a farming industry, especially a growing industry, and the use of structures that are built and then not required for that use further down the line will always happen, whether it's a house or a shed or an outbuilding or a large whatever. And I guess that's part of a developing island, the way things happen. But the farming industry has changed dramatically in 40 or 50 years. We had hundreds and hundreds of farmers and hundreds of dairy farmers, and we've now got small handfuls of both. And the requirements that they have are changed. We have, you know, much larger. The way we plant our potatoes, for example, is you could not believe 20 years ago that we would be doing things like we are now.
Is this something that you think needs to be looked at ahead of the next island plan? If you're saying that maybe the Bridging Island plan is not necessarily capturing that change of use in the way that it potentially could do, would it need to be then looked at in
Well,
more?
we're certainly looking at change of use in the planning reform. There's certain things that we'd like to improve and so that some changes of use could be done quicker and more easily. But the change of use of agricultural buildings, we need, you know, it has to remain a challenge for the person applying. I think that's quite clear, because obviously by courtesy of the fact that they're agricultural buildings, they're out in the countryside. We need to be really careful how we're developing the countryside. Jersey's environment is so hugely valuable to everybody on the island, and that's why things like the island plan are so important, because without island plans our countryside might look very, very different. So change of use of agricultural buildings is an interesting one. We've certainly more recently changed the policy on granite and farm complexes. Older farm complexes that are made of granite, much easier to convert than it was previously. That's obviously for two reasons. One, they're nice buildings, but secondly, historic 200-year-old farm building is not much use to an existing farmer. Machinery can't get in and out. You've got hundreds of cattle, whereas in the past you might have had half a dozen. I mean, they just don't fit into agriculture anymore, other than for accommodation. So we know that we've done that. But it may be something we need to look at, although I think I say this very much off the top of my head, but we've been down to a very few number of farmers for some few years now, and I don't know that there's a lot more farmers to come out of the industry, which is great news. So maybe the demand for change of use of agricultural buildings won't be as great as it was 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, and I think, it goes back to the issue about evidence. What is the evidence? What is the need in terms of both for agricultural sheds, but also for alternative uses of those assets, and how can you provide that in a planning sense? So, that's part of the work that we do with economic development, to look at where the demand is.
Minister, we've just got a couple more questions, but noting the time, I hope you're okay just to go over a couple of minutes. But we're nearly at the end.
No, that's fine.
So turning to Deputy Curtis, and that you were talking about the reviewing the structure.
So, Minister, I think you and your officers have mentioned, obviously, you are out for consultation on a range of areas, including a review of the plan form and plan structure. But first, we obviously note that the law allows the Bridging Island plan to remain in use. But what specific indicators will you use to determine when a new plan is needed, which is the wording the law requires you to then issue a new one? How are you currently assessing that, or are you going to wait until your consultation is finished?
Well, I said right at the start that I think housing is the real reason why island plans come forward, the need for more housing sites, and I think that will be the overriding case here as well. I mean, we've had a general discussion today about whether there's anything that's really pressing in the island plan outside of the housing section, which might be a reason for a necessity for the island plan to be redebated. But I think it's incumbent upon us, and we are yeah, we are doing the work. We will continue to keep an eye on the housing numbers, and obviously supply and demand is something which is hugely important to that. But we need to be realistic. This Bridging Island plan came in 22, was it 22?
Yep, March.
22. Okay, so we are, yeah, I mean, next year we're going to be halfway through what would normally be a 10-year plan. And if it was a 10-year plan, we wouldn't be that far off starting work on the next 10-year plan anyway. So I think irrespective of what happens in the housing sector, I think we will have the initial discussions before the next election to a bit of a plan for a plan, and then after the next election, the new government needs to make a decision, and I would heavily suggest that they need to push a button to say yes, we will review it again, irrespective, because of many of the things that we've spoken about. It may be water, it may be minerals, it may be infrastructure, it may be things. But I think we need to get on top of a number of
Conscious
issues.
of your time as well here. Your consultation has some fundamental changes that could occur in a plan such as a multi-tier plan framework or a singular plan. But you have mentioned the pressing need, in your view, to reinstate the ability to amend a singular plan, even if that's a route to go down. Is that something you think is on the legislative books this side of the election?
Is that a single? But can we do that individually? I think we've certainly discussed it. If I have the ability to, I will. You know, as we chatted about, I don't have the ability to do lots of things I'd like to do because I can't change policy. But one thing I could do, if it's available to me, is to make that change, and I think it's really important.
And would that relieve pressure on having to make fundamental changes to the plan form?
Well, I think then it gives options, doesn't it, in the sense that you can, you could split the plan, or you could just decide that you're going to keep the plan as a singular plan, but you might review parts of it. So, if you look at the history of the island plan, generally there have been interim reviews of the plan in the past. So, in 2002, there was a review in 2008 to bring forward some elderly persons' homes. And if you look at the 2011 island plan, that was reviewed in 2014. Principally around housing requirements. So, we have had that mechanism previously, and it has been used to revise just parts of the plan. So,
I think making that change will be important, especially just something simple like resources. If we know we're going into the next plan debate, we can not to do a certain number of sections. That just cuts out a load of work, and time is money.
Thank you.
Yes, I would say it would probably help you in your, if you're going to be looking at things during period of time, as you said you were, then that would, to have that stake's decision in place might give you some.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned
background.
PERDA only because we discussed recently some work that we needed to do, and we decided that PERDA was a good opportunity for officers to get on with that. But no, we would want to make that. I would want to make that decision well before PERDA, because that's quite an important decision. I'm not sure that I'd be allowed to do that.
I think the other point I was going to make in terms of the timetable for the Minister dealing with issues to change the planning framework, it would be helpful to be able to change the planning framework for an island plan so that prior to starting a new island plan, we know what the legal context is for that plan. So that's the aspiration, to deliver that before the end of this term, so that the new government have a clear, a new legal framework to take the next plan forward.
Thank you. Conor, you have your
Well, thank you. Well, this has been a general hearing to assess basically how the Bridging Island plan was working. So the final question really is, Minister, to what extent do you believe that the Department has got its balance of policies and implementation right, particularly when considering the 5 key areas? And I can list the 5 key areas if you want, but I'm sure you know them off by out.
Well, I think there's a reasonable balance. I mean, the Marine Spatial Plan is a really good document, and we've got it completed, and it's out the door, and it's working. That's just a big tick. Other bits we haven't moved forward with quite so quickly, but I think we're cognizant of all those 5 subjects, and they are still and will remain very important as we move forward. I would say, just getting back to the point that we were just talking about previously, about maybe changing the way the island plan is developed, and whether we need a plan as it currently sits, or we need 2 plans, or we come up with all sorts of other stuff. That I personally feel that the island plan as it is at the moment, is the way it's developed, has worked well for the island, apart from this ability to go back to changing the rules and go back to where we were before the Bridging Island plan. And yes, we said we would, as part of planning reform, look at all the options for various ways of coming up with an island plan, if you want to call it that. But for me personally, I think the way we do island plans has served us well since 1987, and I look around the island generally and say that I'm pretty satisfied that I think it's done okay. We've had a lot of pressures, we've got more people, we need more people. They've all got to live somewhere, and that gives us challenges building in the countryside, but I think the island still looks okay. There's always some planning decisions on design that you look at after they've been built and go, maybe we could have gone back and done a bit better, and some bits of design I think look really great, but I'm sure officers around everywhere get that the same, but I'm generally very happy with the way the plan works.
And I think, Minister, and I think you've kind of answered this last question. But obviously, our political term is not far from being finished. We've just talked about it. It's in months now, and we've gone through a number of areas, both strategic proposals and this underlying assumptions that we're all grappling with, and you've talked about the restraints that you're under. But where do you think you want to leave this work for your predecessor at the end of this term? Like, what are the main things? I think you've kind of mentioned two big areas, but I was wondering where you would feel that you want to leave this at the end of your term.
Well, I've been fortunate in some ways to be able to do the work on strengthening the economic input into planning applications. I've done some bits and pieces with historic windows and doors. I've done some bits and pieces. It's not easy. Well, let's start. Until you're a minister in government, it's very challenging to make changes, but it's not impossible. As a backbencher, it's easier as a minister, but even in a ministry, it's not easy. And if you're the planning minister, who happens to be the planning minister between island plan debates, it's very difficult to change the direction of travel because you can't change policy. And I know when I was minister back in 2014-18, I said, I really would value the opportunity. I'd really love the opportunity to take an island plan to the States Assembly, purely because, as a politician, you come into politics to try to do things better and differently, and having the opportunity to propose an island plan is probably as good as an opportunity you're ever going to get. So it has been a challenge, but I look back at the work that the officers have done in the last 18 months, 2 years, and I'm really grateful that I've been part of helping the planning department particularly, and the policy department, because they sit in front of planning. Development control, to move forward in the relationship that they have with the applicants and with the general public. And I'm sure the people I speak to now, I had an email the other day from a retired architect who had gone through the planning process as a private individual and he wrote to me, and I forwarded it on to the whole department, saying how grateful he was that things were so much better now than they have been previously. So we've got over that hurdle, but we now move into other areas where we need to really develop some serious policy and make sure that the island is prepared for the future, and all those key assumptions that the Constable was talking about, minerals, water, energy is another massive issue that we need to grapple with, as you know only too well, Chair. And the next island plan, during the next island plan, if it's a 10-year plan, we will see some massive changes in the way we use energy on this island, courtesy of carbon neutral and all sorts of other things like that. So for me, I'm sure everybody says everybody's always said the next island plan is really important. For me, I see some real fundamental changes to the way the island's going to have to do things in the next 15 years. And I think this next island plan is a really, really important strategic structural document for Jersey as we move into the new era, especially around energy.
Yes, so building on the idea that you bring a proposition to be able to
debate one part of the plan in
Yes,
isolation.
would that give you an opportunity in your accompanying report to highlight some of the points you mentioned during this hearing?
I'm sure when it comes to that, I'm sure in any proposition the proposer wants to put forward examples to why the proposition is a good idea, to try to convince other states members to support and push the right button. And I'm sure if we come forward with that proposition before the next election, we will be quoting some examples as to why it's a good idea to do that. And I don't think it'll be difficult to find any number of examples.
Right, well, thank you very much, Minister. Thank you very much, officers, for your time here. And thank you also for allowing us another 10 minutes over the 2 hours that we already
Barely
grilled you on this
noticed.
subject.